Then somewhere.
Have you
Contracting, is
started?
it? Not permanent, okay.
So they just
I'm trying to get.
through agency outside. Surabhi, it started. We can go with
Yeah.
How are you doing, all right? Good, thank you. Lovely. Oh, yeah. There's a fridge there with drinks. Help yourself. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a fridge there with drinks. Just help yourself.
I'll say at least we don't. No, no, the thing is after that, this was suppose this one is marketing. No email, follow. Everybody they consider this. No, not to proceed tonight now. Okay, we did Dr. Kenna yesterday, last week at the chat and see in South Africa. And so they want to know the other way. You don't know, you don't get people now, so you know, to this thing. What it means, I mean, we like
Hello, hello, how are you? Hello, hello, how are you? Hello, hello, how are you? extended it. You're right. Just pressed extended. Just did it for an hour. So. What's that guy's name at the back? What's that guy's name? Jack. Jack. Asking if there's any more. Is there any more to come? All right, at the minute. Yep. Okay. Okay. Everyone got a drink? Ready to make a start? Yep. Good. Right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here at the second Power BI user group of the year, February 2025. Firstly, a huge thank you to Accenture, who have kindly offered us their space and take over their office for the evening. I don't know, was anyone here last time we were here? Anyone? No? So actually, I think it was myself who did a presentation here about 4 years ago. So, and there was none of this here, none of these screens, none of this setup. So I think it's quite a nice revamp that they've done here. But thanks for each of you for coming. Any newbies here? Anyone here for the first time? Oh, got quite a few newbies. Any DAX experts? Well, we've got a DAX expert there. We've got another one over here as well. Any Power BI users? Yeah, we've got a few in there as well. Cool. So, no, thanks for coming in. And you know, it's you guys who make this community all great and, you know, makes these events so special and makes me want to continue doing them as well. So thanks for coming out tonight. Today, just quick look at the schedule. So we're going to start with just an overview of the user group, quick intro. Then we've got Kranthi coming up as our first speaker in around 5-10 minutes. We'll have a quick break and then Mark will come on for our second talk. PSET networking after that, bit of close, and then we'll be out on the town at around 9 o'clock. So you're all welcome to join us for that as well. Again, just big thanks to Accenture. I don't know where Brett has gone. It was his 5 minutes of fame. I was going to give him the floor. Let me back up. Right, we'll come back to it. But yeah, just a quick one on what Accenture do and what they're working on in terms of data and analytics at the moment. I think he wanted to share some of that with you. So as soon as he gets back, we'll go over that sort of stuff. So we've got two incredible speakers tonight lined up for you. First, we have Kranthi Dev. So he'll be taking us through the world of composite data models in Power BI. And if that sounds too complicated, he'll explain it so well that you'll be dreaming in star schemas by the end of the day. Then we've got the legendary Mark Endicott talking about advanced partitioning with the XMLA endpoint. And if you're wondering what that means, let's just say if Power BI had an elite level, this would be it. Both these sessions are going to be action-packed with knowledge bombs. So please take notes or just take pictures of the slides and then pretend to know what they're talking about later on. Okay. Just a quick little bit about us. We started in around 2020, which is when we had one of the events here. We've got over 850 members growing month on month now, thanks to our regular events. So we aim to have monthly in-person events. We might have the odd person remote from abroad. We're streaming it live on YouTube via the BI WizKid YouTube channel, so you can always follow it afterwards if you wanted to check out what's been said. We work with local speakers, companies and organizations as well, and that's the thing that I want to try and improve and grow as well. And we're dedicated to growing tech community in the north and in Leeds as well. Socials. So if you wanted to join in socials, you know, it's great to share content, pictures, images, especially when we're in when we're online and wanting to sort of spread the word about the Leeds user group as well. Great way to keep in touch, great way for you to showcase people that you're in touch with the community, in touch with the technology and what's going on within the industry day to day. So you're welcome to take a picture and then follow along on these links later on. Just a quick update about some training. So I'm carrying out some training starting next week with an introduction to Power BI. I've got some other workshops coming up further down the line in the next few months. If you do want to join any of these, drop me a message after the session or during the session whenever you have some time, and we can go over each one of those and how we can get involved in those as well. Any jobs about? So, of course, when we worked last year with Rob Walters, they obviously worked with a lot of jobs in the north and in Manchester, but I've had a couple of organizations or local companies come up to me and ask if we can share details about job roles that they have. So this is a Leeds-based Power BI developer or BI developer. 2 days, working from home, 3 days as well, up to 50k. You can take a picture and there's some details there. tom@hainton.com, who got in touch. And if you want to contact them, or you can contact me via meetup of LinkedIn, I can do you an introduction as well. But essentially, this will be a good way for you to get into the industry as well. Another one with Hopton Analytics. I don't know if you recall Hopton Analytics. It was Simon Devine. He did a session with, it was at XM. I don't know if you were at the XM one that we did slightly out of Leeds City Centre. But they're looking for a Power BI developer as well, more of a junior role. So this is paying up to around, I think, 30 to 38k. So what I get asked generally at pretty much every event is, how can I get started within Power BI? How can I get started with data? I haven't got the experience. And what Simon has told me actually in this job, if you haven't got the experience, but you've got the desire and you've got the ambition to learn, then they'll be willing to teach you on the job as well. Okay, so again, take a snapshot of that. Hopton Analytics, if you want to give them a search as well. Alternatively, if you want to give me a message and you want to apply for this, I can do you an introduction as well. Okay. And next month, we've got a big session coming up next month. We have Ruth Pozuelo Martinez. I don't know if you know her, but she's a massive lady on YouTube, has over 140k YouTube subscribers, Microsoft MVP as well. She'll be joining us remotely from Sweden live. So I've been after her for about 2 or 3 years, trying to get her to do a talk for us, and finally I've managed to lock her down for next month. So she'll be here, she'll be online, she'll be live with us online, not in person, unfortunately. And we've also got Johnny Winter will be looking at data modeling for superstars, following the guide to Power BI and Fabric with Ruth. So that'll be 13th of March, back here at Accenture, same time as today. Ruth is a legend. Thank you. I've been more excited than this. Yeah. She is a massive speaker. So if you haven't seen any of her videos, do a search on Kerbal on YouTube, and she'll come up, and you'll see her with thousands of videos on there. Okay, that's enough for me. Please give a warm welcome to Kranthi Kumar. If you give us a minute or so to set up. Kranthi, come on up. Okay, right. So first of all, is that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. May you know if anyone has got chance to use composite models apart from an expert? Okay, no worries. Like maybe you would have used direct queries anytime. Okay. So, okay, no worries. I'll just give you a background about what exactly is all about and what are the various modes and then why we would need these modes in different scenarios. Yeah. So, so when we start with the data connection mode, so the basic thing that starts with the Power BI is all about importing the data into your system, right? That's where the most of the magic is all about. So if our data models are perfect, if we have been configuring them correctly, so that you never face any issue as part of your requirements. So so that's where people try to follow certain standard practices. So firstly, we need to understand the volume of the data as first thing, and then the frequency of the data refresh. So how frequently your data is going to get refreshed. That's the other important thing that we need to understand. Based on this, we can set our data loading policies accordingly. So the direct query mode or live connect mode, so which the word clearly says always for every click that you do on your report will always triggers and send some queries to the data sources. So you can see here in the import mode, your first thing starts like to import the data and then bring it to your semantic model. But whereas in your direct query mode, you have to just create the connections, and then every point of time for every click there will be an interaction happening with the data sources. So so these are the two different things that we could understand. And we have other modes which are not that really that important, that's only for mostly for few of the times, like stream analytics. We have push mode, so which means like you technically need to import your data for every second. So that's where those kind of modes to comes up. So let's jump on to import mode, a traditional import mode. So most of you would have been hearing about ETL from long time, from last 10 years or last 15 years, like Informatica and a lot of tools which does the ETL. It's all about extraction, transformation, and load. So Power BI is one of a very specific and very unique tool that also offers ETL. Like in the market, we have a lot of BI tools, but they don't have the capability of full ETL. But with Power Query integrated in the Power BI, that lets us to do the ETL. So in the import mode, as first thing, we try to extract all the data from the data source system and try to put it into the Power BI. That's the first step that happens in import mode. So where you could see like the first step as like extract, and then the second thing, Power BI lets us to do wide range of transformations like joins, unions, like creation of new columns, whatever the data that you would like to work on. So all the transformations could be happening and Power Query. So you have the transformations, and then once you have transformed your data, you can load the data into the Power BI semantic model, so which could be widely used for your reporting purposes. So import mode technically just act as like an ETL tool. So that's about the import mode. And then when we try to understand the pros and cons of import mode, so since all the data is already extracted, so there is no lag. So it doesn't wait. It's like just like you have downloaded your movie, right? So there is no lag, there is no buffer. So it's quite best in the performance, and then it can do wide range of transformations. So wide range of data transformations is its capability. So, and then advanced data modeling, since the data is with you, so you can go ahead and build your star schema, snowflake schema, so galaxy schema. So it's like how we connect the tables. So that's the schema is all about. So we can do the advanced data modeling as well. And then since import mode doesn't require the source system to be active 24/7 sort of, so it works with majority of the data sources, whether it's like SAP, whether it's like relation databases, whether it's like some file system, JSON files, CSV files. So it works with any sort of files. So that's where the pros of the power import mode. And then when we try to think about the cons, so we can clearly see like there is a data refresh frequency, because once you have pushed the data into Power BI, so that's where the connection ends. And then when there is a refresh happen, let's say tomorrow I have went and updated like couple of rows in my Excel file, I need to bring those new rows or new records into the Power BI. So that's where the requirement of data refresh would come into picture. And then we can't go ahead and simply refresh it for every day then and there. Because of there are certain limitations that Power BI lets us, like hardly we can do like 48 times in a day. Is technically that's we can do the data refresh within a day for a report. Uh, and then coming to the data set size limitation. So since all the data is coming and getting in, staying inside the Power BI semantic model, so the this data set size limitation is all about the limits of the semantic model. So so in general, we have like 10 GB of data set size limitation, and that can be increased up to 40 GB when you're on the premium. Uh, on one point to remember about dataset size limitation is like, let's say if I have my Excel file, which is like 10 GB, for example. I mean, Excel generally allows up to 2 GB ideally. But in case if I have like 10 GB of dataset size, so what happens is like when you import this data into Power BI, so the engine will compress the data. So the 10 GB could become 2 GB. So that's what we have to try to remember when we are talking about the dataset size limitation. So and then when it comes to real-time reporting, so with the import mode, it's quite difficult to show real-time reporting, is because we have to do a refresh. So if I just go ahead and split like 48 times, so it's technically comes like 15 minutes. So your report could refresh hardly once in every 15 minutes. So which means like you can't do the real-time reporting, but yes, with the near real-time reporting. And one other thing is like there's a high load on Power BI server. The reason is, so every time, whatever the transformations, whatever the query processing, whatever the user clicks, everything would be happening on the Power BI server. So it's just only the Power BI server is taking the full uh, capacity. So those are the pros and cons generally on the import mode. So just before we switch on to direct query mode, so would do you want to say anything from your projects or yeah?
So when you say request, do you request the whole, all the data, including those that are already in your model, or can you request just the delta?
Yeah, that's where the composite model is going to come in place. So where we'll talk about the hybrid models. Yeah, yeah, everything. Yeah, ideally.
As you actually wanting to view which contain delta.
Yes, absolutely. And then we have the follow-up session where about XMLA partitioning. So which also tries to showcase you like how you can just do the delta loading as well with XMLA. Yeah, that's a quick glance about the import mode. Hope you have got chance to understand a little bit of the import mode, and then in which scenarios you will be generally going with the import modes, and then its pros and cons. But when we go through the direct query mode, you would be able to a little bit more understand what exactly is import mode and then what exactly is direct query mode. Yeah. So if I just go with the direct query mode, so it's just a data connectivity, just like YouTube. It's just like streaming every time, like 24/7. So so with the direct query mode, what happens essentially is like it provides a connection system to the data source and makes it real time. So it's available like throughout the data source is available. So every time, so it's trying to interact with the data source system, and then it fetches the data back into the Power BI from the data sources. So direct query mode is just a connectivity feature, and that allows to maintain the real time connectivity. So uh, with direct query mode, we would be able to do the real time dashboarding, which means like, for example, if I want to see like what's happening with my store for every minute, every 5 minutes, so direct query mode is the best thing that we could do. Yeah. So and then when we talk about the pros and cons, so you could see here now what are the pros. Most of the pros, those are good with import mode are now not that good with direct query mode. And then when you see the cons, so most of the most of the cons of import mode would become the pros of the direct query mode. So you can just see here. So over here we are talking about performance, transformations, and then data modeling. Those are the pros about the import mode. And then we could see here, performance is a con for the direct query mode. The reason why performance is a con is not that good is just because it has to, for every click that a user makes, it has to go to source system, runs the queries, and then fetch back the results, and then populate the values, and then show the visuals. So there is a lot of process in between. So it's like just like the YouTube, right? So and then coming to transformations, yes, it's again a con because the full power of Power Query we cannot go ahead and use it, which means essentially we lose a lot of transformation capabilities. And then advanced data modeling is also not that supported completely because most of the data modeling would be happening on your data sources side, and very less number of data sources are supported. The reason is like the so in order to make a source, in order to make a data source to be accepting direct query, it has to be available 24/7, which is not the case for all the time. So like we have like Excel files which you cannot make it available 24/7, like JSON files or some of the source systems, like some of your ERP systems, right? So for that, Power BI has went ahead and created something called data gateways to make your on-prem systems, on-prem sources to be available, but it has its own uh, difficulties to make the Power BI gateway to be available for 24/7. And then when we look into some of the cons, so sorry, some of the pros, sorry, some of the pros. So we could see like data refresh. We So we doesn't need to worry about whether my data is getting refreshed or not, whether my Power BI refresh has been successful or failed. We doesn't need to worry about that just because it's real time. So every click that you make, it just goes to the system and fetch back the value. And coming to dataset size limitation, there is no dataset size limitation in direct query mode. The reason is like we are not trying to import any data into Power BI semantic model. Everything, it just goes there and fetch back the values. The only one limitation that we could remember is the volume of rows, the number of rows that query mode is fetching. So it can fetch up to 1 million aggregated rows, but typically it's suggested for 150K rows that on an aggregation level, or maybe a 16 MB of data package. So that's a technical limitation for the dataset size. And real-time reporting, yes, there are quite range of real-time reporting options and features are available, like change detection. If you wanna specifically focus on a single visual, like you're just on a kind of a sensor system that's working for you, and you're trying to fetch the results, and it doesn't even need to refresh your browser or your report to view the changes. So Power BI has a change detection mechanism enabled for the direct query. So that lets you to go ahead and refresh your data automatically, your visuals automatically for every second, up to like within 1 to 2 seconds. Right. That's the best thing about the direct query integrated with change detection. So with that feature, and then there is no high load on Power BI server. The reason is like all the transformations are happening typically on the data source side, leaving like less number of transformations and that would lead to less load on the Power BI server. And then data security wise, direct query is best because all the data sits in the data source system. It's not copied in anywhere. It's not being transferred to any other source system. So yeah, that's about the direct query mode. So we could see like direct query mode and import mode are like North Pole and South Pole. Technically, people would see it, uh, and either you have to be in direct query mode or either you have to be on import mode earlier. So in order to overcome this issue, like there could be some kind of situations where we would need some of my source systems or an import mode, and then some of my source systems are on direct query mode, and I want to build a report using both of those. So that's where we have got the composite models. Yeah, this is a very quick kind of a go through about differences between direct query mode and import mode. Some of the places wherever I find like green, I feel like that's doing better, and then there are certain points where I couldn't say whether it's best or this is best because it has its own limitations. Yeah. So we have just tried to understand like import mode has its own limitations. Like I cannot go ahead and have the real-time streaming. I cannot have like I have like dataset size limitations. Whereas when I go with direct query mode, the performance is not that good, right? So and I can do the real-time streaming. So I want to mix and match of everything. So that's where Power BI has introduced composite models. So composite model is just a simple, in just simple layman words, we can say is like it's just like import mode plus direct query mode that's equivalent to composite model. Uh, yeah, you can see here maybe a simple scenario like I have some of my data in my database, and then some of my reporting systems or reporting data is in my Excel. So the blend is going to be getting inserted into Power BI model, and then we're going to build the reports. So that's overview about the composite model. So that's where Power BI has introduced something called dual mode. The reason why this dual mode has been introduced as part of composite model is, imagine like I have loaded like few of my tables as my import mode from Excel file, and then I have loaded my some of my tables from database, and then I'm trying to connect these two tables, these two sources. So what typically happens is like all of my historical data is in my import mode, and then I have my real time data in my tables. So when I try to build a report, uh, imagine like all of my customers' data is in my import mode, and then the orders are uh, in my SQL sources, right? So which is like a direct query mode. So I have got like new customer, and then the sales order is coming up, but I'm not able to find who is that customer because my customer data is not refreshed. I'm just refreshing daily once hardly, and then all of a sudden I have got a new customers, and then they are placing some orders, and then I'm not able to show who has made the orders. So this is an issue, right? So this is where the dual mode has been set up, so that it allows a table to act as like import mode as well as like direct query mode. So it means like typically one data source which can act as like both. So it's just simple, fundamental. So whenever an import mode table is connecting to a dual mode, the dual mode table will act as an import mode table, and whenever a direct query table is trying to connect to the dual mode table, so the dual mode table will act as a direct query mode. So which means the queries of the customer and the sales, it will always go to the, since my customer table is a dual mode, so it will go to the data source system all the time whenever I'm just trying to work on my showcase my total sales. And when I'm talking about just try to show my total number of customers and then his address or something, so address table is an import mode table. So since address table is an import mode table and my customer table is a dual mode table, so now the customer table will act as a import mode table, and it will not try to hit the source systems. So that's how it manages with dual mode. So that's where it tries to save certain uh, burden on the source systems. So we have to be very cautious in terms of choosing the dual mode, especially based on your requirements, based on your reporting requirements, and then what visuals you're trying to build up, what kind of data, what kind of columns are you're trying to merge. So that's what we have to be generally cautious about. Otherwise, we'll end up with showing some of the blanks. So a typical dual mode will just look like this. So the table, the sales order, which is like completely blue line. So that's my direct query mode table. And if you see the product category, there is no color at all. So that's the import mode table. And the merge of import mode and then the color of the import mode and then the color of the direct query mode has been given to the dual mode. So you can see the dashed lines, which is in the blue. So that's the dual mode. So now let's just try to see like how I could just create a dual mode in my Power BI report. So we'll just quickly just see. So whenever we load the tables, so here I have already loaded these tables and I have already set it up. So this is my product table, which is on dual mode, and then this is my table on my direct query mode. So I'll just show you where we could just go ahead and choose your table to be under what kind of mode that you would like to have it on. So you can see here under the advanced settings, So you could always just go ahead and choose your storage mode. So you can always have like import, direct query, and the dual mode. So based on your requirements, and then you can set your tables accordingly. So so this blue one, so this been a set it up as like direct query mode, and then this one I have set it as like dual mode, right? And then this one, the product category, is on import mode. And one thing what we have to remember about choosing your modes is all about like once you have choose as import mode, you cannot switch to any of the other modes. So once you have choose as like import mode, that's the table, it's going to be the import mode. If you need to make a change, for example, by mistake you have made your table as like import mode, you have to go ahead and delete the table and then reload the table as a direct query mode. So that's what we have to do. And when I'm on a dual mode, I always have the flexibility to choose and change to any mode whenever I need it. Yeah. So that's the same applies with the storage mode as well. So so in this way we can just go ahead and set the dual mode accordingly. Yeah. Okay. So you know a little bit of problems with the import mode, and then the advantage of import mode, and then you know about a little bit problems about the direct query mode, and then the advantage of the direct query mode. So now I was just giving you a walkthrough about the dual mode, right? So where a single table can act as like both import mode as well as a direct query mode based on the table that it is trying to interact with that table, with the dual table, right? Uh, still, still there is certain difficulties, and then there are certain drawbacks with the dual mode. The reason is like if you see the sales order, it's on complete direct query mode, and then let's say I have sales from last 5 years. So whenever I'm trying to write uh, whenever I'm trying to build any visual, so every time, let's say I want to see only the last month's data. So, but still, your query will be operating on the last 5 years of data. So that's a very downside actually. So that's where Power BI has introduced the hybrid tables. So so that it just the hybrid tables will just go ahead and create a partitions. So imagine you have like 5 years of data. You just go ahead and imagine like let's say last 3 years of data. You generally don't go ahead and use it very frequently, right? So maybe last 1 year data you'll be just very occasionally you'll be using it, maybe monthly once, right? But when it comes to the current month or last month data, that's where you just try to analyze, and then you'll be trying to take some actions and insights from your last month data or maybe last 1 year data. So that's where the hybrid tables comes into the picture. I'll just show you very quickly. So if you just try to see, for example, out of your 100% of data, so most of the time you'll be hardly using the top 10% of data, which is your recent amount of time, and then hardly the last 20-30% of your data that's been coming from your last historically. So that's the frequent one, and then which is anything like let's say after 2 years or after 3 years, it's just like very occasionally, maybe very once in a year or something like that for your annual or quarterly reports. And then all the archive data is like, you never try to use that at all. So that's how, I mean, it's not, it varies with every business and scenarios, but generally this is what a standard that people do assume. So that's where if you imagine if your all your 5 years of sales data, for example, has been categorized into 5 parts, so that maybe if you think like the most of the time, imagine like most of the time that the data that you use, imagine that if it is on direct query mode, and the remaining all of your 4 parts out of the 5, like which is all of your 4 years of data, is in import mode. Imagine if having a table something like a blend of both import mode and the direct query mode. So that gives like a lot of advantage, and then that improves a lot of performance as well. So and then that's where we can get the blend of real-time reporting with import mode as well, right? So I think you have just asked about the delta refresh. So with the hybrid tables we would be able to refresh, we'll be refreshing only the data that's been used most of the time, because once your sales has been completed, you doesn't try to go ahead and refresh your data like 4 years ago or 3 years ago sales. You doesn't need to try to refresh your data, right? So that's where hybrid tables comes into picture. So we'll try to see how we can just simply set it up the hybrid tables. So if, for example, uh, if this is my table that I would like to set it as like hybrid mode. So what I could do is like I have to just firstly go ahead and set up like two parameters, which is like what's my range start and then what's my range end. So that's where I could able to understand, okay, this is my range that I would like to go ahead and set it to archive sorting sort of. So firstly, we need to set some parameters. So to just set some parameters, I'll just go ahead and say it like range start. And then I'll just say like it should be of daytime. And then you can just provide like what are the values you like to 0101 2020. And then similarly, you'll create one more parameter. That's your range end. So this is the range that you'd like to have the data. So from 2020 onwards, let's say till 2025, which is like 5 years. And then I just have to go ahead and apply a filter on the table, on the sales table. Structure table name. I can just choose a custom filter. That's my load time. That's where we just need to choose the column that where the dates get generally updated. I can just choose the parameter that we have used. Software or equal to is before. So I'm just saying like, okay, this is my 5 years of data that I would like to have as part of my uh, hybrid table. So I have just added that filter. Close and apply. So now this sales order table, it's just having only the 5 years of data starting from 2020 Jan 1st until the December 12th of 2025. So now in order to set an incremental refresh, so hybrid tables works on incremental refresh policies. So we'll just set a incremental refresh policy. So we just need to go there and yeah, firstly, we just need to convert this table into import mode.
So it can't go from the dual.
No, dual mode is technically a direct query table that just has a cache on the backend. So hybrid tables are on the import mode tables. That's where it just tries to import all the data and creates the partitions in the ground level. So yeah, it has to be on import mode every time. So once it has been import mode, we can start seeing like the option has been enabled. So we can just switch it on. So this lets us to enable the incremental refresh policy, and we have to provide all the corresponding parameters. So where you're going to say like, based on your data, based on your report, based on your circumstances, what data, what time of data you want to archive, like which is like very unused, or you can say like very cold data, right? So you can just go ahead and enter some maybe last 3 years of data or something like that. So, and then incrementally refresh for last 12 months of data, for example. Right. If you see here now, so it's saying like from March 1st, 2022 until the 2024, all of your data is like archived in the sense like it's not like lost, it's available, but it's on the import mode. And then last 12 months data starting from 2024 March 1st until the Feb 28th, which is this month. So it's going to be refreshed continuously. And then as the month keeps changing, so let's say next March comes up, right? So then the incremental refresh starting date would be which we switch to April 1st until the March end. So it will automatically change. So it doesn't need to worry about your last 12 months, right? And then once you have set it up, so imagine this is like, it's going to create like partitions. So you have your 3 years of data partition. So you can see here, like this is your 3 years of data that's archived. And then this year, 12 months of data that's been getting refreshed, incremental refreshed. So which means you can go out and change your sales data. Let's say if there is any of the things that has been happened wrongly, entered wrongly, if you change the data in your backend, so it will go out and refresh the data. So, but typically it doesn't need the 12 months. Ideally, people will generally choose the three months or 1 month or something like that. Yeah. So that's about this. And then you can observe the dates range would be changing automatically. So it gets updated accordingly. So it doesn't need to worry about those. And then whether do you need the latest real-time data. So once you have just enabled this one, so you can just see here till now. So you have only 2 partitions. I mean, there could be like a lot of data partitions in the real background, but typically you could see like two big partitions. One is like the archive partition, and then the other one is the incremental refresh partition. That's for your 3 months, and then this for all the other 3 years of data. Right. The moment you just go ahead and select this option, so it just enables the direct query mode. So which means like now the same table. So before I just go ahead and select this tick mark. So what's happening is like it's just a simple import mode table. And then whenever your data gets refreshed, so it will just go ahead and refresh if there are any changes that has happened in the last 3 years within that period of time, like before the end of Feb, for example. So only that 3 months of data will get refreshed. So which is a delta refresh, right? So that's it. But if I need the real-time data as well to be included as part of this report, so this option will just let you to enable that direct query. Sorry. No worries. That's good actually, because we can always change it anyways. Okay. So once you select this option, you can see this additional partition that's coming up. So which is your direct query mode, which lets you to fetch the latest data whenever it happens, like instantly within like 1 minute, 30 seconds. So it will be able to get the data accordingly. So you can see the real-time data that will be happening from the start of the month. So that's what it generally does. So it's all about like one single table. You're now trying to set it up as like import mode plus direct query mode, which means, yeah.
So just direct query mode, last 3 months or what?
No, direct query mode will be applied from start of the first of the current month. So here you could see this date. So real-time data will be from 1 to 205.
Yeah, you can't change that.
No, it's a default one. I mean, there are some XML experts that they could do, but yeah, it's just generally for the month wise. So it just tries to showcase the data load.
What's the significant difference between import mode and hybrid mode?
So in import mode, it's just only the import mode. So you have to go ahead and import all the data, and then your reports will get using the data. You will be getting displayed based on the data that has been imported, right? And if you need to showcase any of your latest data that happening, let's say immediately I have got like some 10 sales order in last 2 minutes. So I want to see that. So which means like I can't see them in the import mode instantly. I have to schedule some refresh pulses in the background, and then it will take at least like 15 minutes of time for you to go out and fetch those last 10 orders that has happened in last 2 minutes, right? So that's where import mode lags, right? It needs at least 15 minutes of time, but that 15 minutes also has like certain limitations, especially like it will, like if you're doing the refresh for every 15 minutes, it's like too much of load on your Power BI server, right? So that's where direct query comes into the picture. But with the hybrid tables, you're not going to load all the data from like what happens in import mode. You're going to go ahead and only take the current month data for the direct query mode, which means it will just go ahead and whenever all the 10 sales order that has happened, so we'll be just instantly getting the showcased on your report.
Yeah. Implemented.
Yeah, it just takes only that data.
So are you saying by picking that box, now your table has become a dual mode table?
Before, so
Because you were actually setting it to import mode,
right.
and so the table is still in import mode. And are you saying by picking that box,
So
it's different to you? Okay. So hybrid is different to you. Okay.
so dual mode is like a single table can act as like both import mode and direct query mode based on the table that it is trying to interact with. So whereas the hybrid table, it doesn't depends on which table it is trying to interact with. So I'll just show you maybe.
It might make sense.
No. So hybrid table is just a single table. You doesn't need to think about the any table that it is trying to interact with. But dual mode, you have to consider which table it is trying to interact. If import table is trying to interact with the dual mode table, so it acts as like import mode. But if a direct query table is trying to interact with the dual table, it will act as like a direct query table. So that's the dual mode is all about.
What's the difference between dual mode and hybrid mode?
Yeah.
Dual mode just basically directly with testing.
Right. So dual mode is based on the, I'm just trying to say like it's based on interaction. For example, so you have your address table. Sorry, I'll just explain this a bit. Yeah. So you have your, for example, you have your customer table, which is an Excel file, for example, and then you have your customer. A customer will have its own address, right? A customer address. So customer table is on a dual mode, and then address table is on a import mode, for example. Okay. So whenever I'm trying to build a report showing like list of all the customers and then trying to showcase their addresses and everything. So if I'm trying to imagine, I'm trying to build a simple table with two columns. One is like my customer name and my customer address. So now this will act as like an import mode. Okay, this table will not try to connect to the data sources. Okay, it will not send any queries to the data source. Okay, but if you see this like customer table is on a dual mode, right? And then it is trying to connect to a sales table, which is on a direct query mode. Okay, so now if you're trying to build, for example, a customer ID and then showing his customer name and then the sales that has been placed by the particular customer. So whenever if you're building this kind of a table, what will happen is like all the queries will be directed to data source. It will not try to connect to the Power BI server. So dual mode will have a cache always. Okay, will have a cache, local cache, but the way it interacts or the way how it represents based on the table that you are trying to interact with. So that's what it's all about. So dual mode is more on the interaction point of view. So it maintains the cache, it acts as an import mode, it acts as a direct query mode, but the key driver is just based on the interacting table. But when it comes to the hybrid table, no interaction, nothing. It doesn't need to worry about which table it's trying to getting interacted with. It just acts on its own. A hybrid table is just like a partition table. Like within the table, it's trying to partition the data, right? So one. Yeah.
So on the hybrid scale, really goes
Right.
what do we do with the real time and the input one side of it, like two queries, or the real time back, or like to say, on a flat partition, or not the
Right. So in the hybrid mode, what happens is like it will do both sort of things. So for the refresh data, so whenever there is a refresh data and based on the aggregation that you're using, so those queries will be sent to the data source for that particular point of time, like filtered data. So whatever the filtered data it's all about. And when it comes to the import partition data, which already your local cache is happening, so it acts as just like an import mode table. So your Power BI server will be doing the certain processing and then trying to populate your visuals. So it's just a collection. It just tries to collect it. So basically,
always false. direct query on that field type.
Yeah, that partition. Yeah.
There is something to be really careful about with hybrid mode. No
Yeah.
matter whether you do not send the query to that direct query data, your direct query source will still be queried. So if all of the query data is in the import partitions, you will still have a query initial database.
Which actually makes sense, though it's a very kind of a side thing, but still it's required because we need to fetch the real data every time. So yeah, it's like in Databricks also we have this kind of a concepts like in all these big data systems. So we have this mappers, reducers, collectors. It just acts simple, something like that. So there is always a collector kind of a mechanism. So it just tries to fetch the results and then collects the data and try to showcase onto the visuals. So yeah, your direct query will be working, and then your local cache of the up to till recent direct query data will also be cached actually. So on your Power BI system, based on your queries, query caching, etc. So based on that, your reports will be showcasing the data.
So it still cache the data.
Yeah.
But even if you have a cache, you can query the data on you still query the data on.
Yes, based on the cache till the point of time cache is available, but caches could be gone in time.
When the query, the data store will actually push down the query to basically say only query just that one data.
It won't.
And the selection is actually happening on the source side. It doesn't protect all the data and then select the last month.
Yeah, it won't work like that. So direct query doesn't try to pull all the 1 month data. What it actually direct query does is like based on the, so let's say imagine you have like some two visuals, okay, two bar charts, and then there are like a couple of filters on your report. So how actually happens is like based on the clicks that you make. Let's say you have clicked on, let's say, one slicer, okay, so your two visuals will get updated. So in order to get these two visuals updated, what will happen is like there are like certain queries, like you might be using, let's say you have like hundreds of fields in your system, but only two fields are being used for your visual one, and let's say three fields are being used for your visual two. So a dynamic query will be getting generated for every visual, and then that query will be passed to the data source system to fetch the results in the direct query
So
mode.
it just pulls down the query.
Yeah, it just sends the query, and then it also depends on what data. It just doesn't depend on just on the hybrid table. The hybrid table will also be connected to additional some other tables as well. So that's how it works.
My name is Sid. I think that at some stage, I believe that very soon, Microsoft will end this desktop version. And everything will go to cloud direct queries. What do you say about it?
So I think if you Google search on the having the presentation in absolutely sort of textbook for sake of simple. And it's really good for all not heard back in 2017 when this technology was first available. Have you used Fabric by any chance?
Yes, we have started. I mean,
Since March, let's say 2016, last year, Fabric and Direct Link.
yeah.
This is absolutely applicable, say 80% of people here.
Yep.
Absolutely. Let's say for people in small, medium-sized companies, for the ones that are large, let's say we're using Fabric.
Yes.
And so the data, let's say, is done at the back end. Don't need to have,
Yes.
say, the
Go with the direct link.
import tables. Don't need to sort of have dual tables. It's just there. It just replicates. It's not fully real time because there's a real time that there's a lag between the master file that's getting updated and the replication to the tables. However, as I say just recently, Microsoft have now brought out Fabric SQL. That is real time. I say so as soon as it's written to, I say it comes through. But I say there's still a proviso because they haven't got all the data adapters built out to elsewhere. So if you give this presentation to elsewhere, say that there's four types, might be worth asking to say a bit. I wasn't going to sort of come in because I know you want to get to the way.
They want to get to the.
But this guy's sort of saying that it's going to become redundant. It already is. It's just like the funding mechanism that's still very, very applicable, say for 80% of the audience here, but the other 20%. Probably in maybe 3 to 5 years, that will be reversed. So 80% of you using Fabric, 20% are still using these legacy systems.
Yeah.
I've got a bit of an anxious say with regard to super users, so I've got exposure, say, to that technology before it was like budget available, but it comes with a cost. So we're going to test it,
Absolutely.
find out they didn't work before it got released. So, I think it's just worth asking. The technology is already it's called Fabric. It's directly.
Yeah.
Are you saying that to be separate and all it is in the cloud, then you're okay to just query the data source every time you
It's a completely different presentation
Yeah.
to do, but it's going to have it's a central source. And one of the downsides of direct lake, you either all direct lake or you're not direct lake. You can't have like one table being input mode and another table being elsewhere. If you do, the whole lot falls back to direct query. So it's a whole different presentation to do.
Yeah. I believe that's the reason like why PL300 certification is also being redundanted and then focusing on DP600 and DP700. I believe that's the strategy of Power BI.
No, that's not the point. At the moment, Fabric has only few thousand subscribers, but Power BI has 5 million subscribers.
Right.
I think they will end this desktop version and will put it on the cloud.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, they could do
And
that,
then
but
all this mess will finish.
but still, a new mesh would just origin, so it won't be the end for sure. Yeah. It also loses the power query, so we can use the data flows and the directly comes up.
Because Fabric is a bit different thing.
It's costlier as well.
Yeah.
when you talk about Fabric, the potential does that apply to this bridge as well?
In Fabric, if you need that, for example, you have to enable the direct link, which comes with additional cost, right? So there's everything is a cost. So right, so it just matters. Yes, Databricks also follows the same system, but Databricks hasn't yet had the direct link kind of a feature yet, I believe, which makes it like it's like merged import mode, direct query mode. All the cons are removed, and then all the pros are merged and then made as like direct link in Fabric. But in Databricks, not yet. I believe that kind of system. That I think that's the unique selling point for Fabric. Maybe as a super user, he can just comment on that. Yeah. So I'll just take another last 1 minute before I just close this. So yeah. So this feature. Yeah. So with this, you're going to add the direct query partition into your system, into your hybrid table, and along with that, so if you just go ahead and we have to be slightly cautious when we're going to choose this option. So detect data changes. So when you just start the detect data changes, so it will be able to start automatically trying to detect the data changes based on the refresh column that just generally happens on the data. So that lets you to go ahead and get like instantly, like within 5 seconds, if you want to see like real-time data. So it can happen, and then using the Power BI tiles and all, you can set up your alert mechanisms, and the alerts could go ahead and set up mails to you, so that there's like something, a fraudulent transaction has happened, or let's say an unauthorized entry has happened in your sensor systems. So yeah, so those are all advantage features that could happen with this detect data changes. Yeah, with that, I'm just closing the session, and then we'll go to the XMLA endpoints.
Very much. Any questions before we break?
Yeah.
These guys are freelancing now. Yeah. That's why.
Just like
Years ago, 10 years ago. We're not money. No.
You'll be using Power BI for a while.
When you're working.
not actually using it. I do need to have knowledge.
Hello, everyone.
It's probably a lot.
I'm Mark Endicott, and I'm here to talk you through advanced partitioning with the XMLA endpoint, which means it's all fun and games from this point onwards. This is a bit of a niche subject, but it is something I have actually implemented it to clients now, so perhaps it will come mainstream at some point. It being niche, don't worry, there is a lot in there for every single person. But before I go on and get into my niche subject, who am I? I said I'm Mark Endicott. I am the lead data and analytics consultant at Triangle Information Management, which is an awful lot of words to say that I basically do a lot of things with Power BI. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm born and bred in Bristol. I've been working in data for the last 8 years. It's actually 9 now. 3 slides are out of date. I started off in the recruitment industry, doing some very poor practice things like writing live SQL queries, sweet SQL queries over a live database, extracting the information into Excel, and then populating some dashboards in Excel. Excel dashboards is not necessarily bad practice, but writing SQL queries over a database, live database is. We actually had one query that we had to run every Friday morning to send some data off to one of our customers. And it was so poorly written that it tended to lock every single consultant out of the database. So what we did is we wrapped that up into some sort of IT maintenance every Friday at 10:30, and the consultants would leave the office, go chat the reception to this up, or have a cigarette. So that's how we got around them actually being locked out. From recruitment, I then moved into facilities management, which is a very boring industry. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. It did teach me a lot of things, such as the principles of visualization. I started using Tableau, and then eventually I got into Power BI. It says I've been working with Power BI for 6 years. It's now 7. Most of that's been in consultancy where I am now, but obviously some of it was in the facilities management industry. I have written down that I'm a specialist in basically everything you can do in Power BI. I'd say I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. Visual principles, yes, that is my specialist area. DAX, I am a Fabric super user for my contributions to the community and helping people out with DAX problems. Data modeling, yes, I know all about that. Power queries, where I'm probably not an expert, but I do know enough about best practices to guide pretty much everybody through it. What I can't do is some of the crazy things that people do on LinkedIn, with the challenges of manipulating data from like things. I just want to cry when I see some of those things that they do. So yeah, I would say I'm a specialist in most of those things, but not all of them. XMLA endpoint and partitioning is probably an area I'm a specialist in. If anybody wants to get hold of me afterwards, you can do so on LinkedIn. I used to be there an awful lot more than I usually am. It's become a bit of a cesspit of people sending out really rubbish stuff and a lot of AI. But what I do every Friday is I send out a reading list of all the things that I've read each and every week to do with the world of data. And there is an awful lot of interesting stuff hyperlinked in that. So if you want to learn some stuff about what I read, look up me now. Today, I'm going to talk about partitioning to start off with. Then I'm going to move into incremental refresh, which Kranthi has covered pretty well already, but I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the things that you need to set up there. In order to explain the very last, it's basically incremental refresh kind of sets the scene. In order to explain some of the functionality, I need to talk about the XMLA endpoint, and then we'll talk about the very sort of advanced partitioning solutions that basically have been fed through the other 2 things that I have gone through. What I will not be talking about is anything to do with Fabric, purely because I am no expert in it. I've not had the chance to use it yet, despite the fact that I'm a Fabric super user. My whole thing is built around Power BI. So I won't be talking about direct lake houses, Fabric notebooks, or any other Fabric functionality. Fabric notebooks is probably where you're going to be able to replicate most of what I show you today if you can write Python, because there is a SemPy library that will be able to hook into some scripting that I'm going to show you later on and be able to replicate basically everything I'm going to do outside of a Fabric notebook. So I said I was going to talk about partitioning because it sets the scene for absolutely everything. So for anybody who's sort of just starting out their career in data in the room or has worked with Power BI for a few years but not used incremental refresh, partitioning is what happens when you do incremental refresh. And it is the breaking up of a table into much smaller chunks or parts, hence where partitioning comes from. When you do partitioning, and you can do it at a database level, and it's very often done at a database level, and it's usually done by date. I then underlined normally purely because later on in this presentation, I'm going to take you through a situation where you're going to partition by something other than a date. It is very useful when you're working with very large semantic models where your historical data doesn't change often because once you have partitioned up your table, I'm going to be showing you later how you can actually refresh partitions that sit in that archived area that Kranthi was talking about earlier. So to give you a practical example of a partition table, imagine we're in May and we have just put together our table which has data for January to May, and it has 35 million rows in it. If you were to partition this table, you would split it up potentially into, in an ideal world, equal monthly partitions of 5 million rows, because every month has exactly the same amount of data, doesn't it? And then because May is not quite complete yet, you might actually partition at the day level until you've got a complete month, in which case then they will all be rolled up, those daily partitions, into the month level. And that was kind of what Kranthi was showing you with the stuff that's being stored and archived. All those partitions that get created get rolled up eventually into the same levels. Before I move on, sorry, does anybody have any questions around what partitioning is? Because I know it might be a new concept for some of you. Does anybody want to ask a quick question, or is everybody good on partitioning?
So when partitioning started in real life?
I cannot answer that. Way before I was born. I'm only 37 years old. I imagine people have been partitioning tables for a bit longer than that, I'd imagine. Maybe. Who knows? Anybody answer that can answer? Can you answer the fabric super user? Do you know
It was way before like SSIS, so way before like sort of Power BI. So it's so a bit with SSIS and probably like
20 odd years ago.
we go there with the old MDEX models. And
one more question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's the difference between that and slow changing dimensions?
Slowly changing dimensions, that's more of a sort of a data modeling sort of theory around basically if you've got a table like a dimension table that has like a store date changes every now and again because you've refreshed you changed something within that store and you need to change it, you would store that as an additional row in the table. So it's not basically splitting a table up into partitions. A slowly changing dimension is a dimension that would store additional rows for the same thing because something for that thing has changed. Does that make sense?
I get it, but somehow it seems the same thing to me because you're breaking this up. So in each of these partitions, you load them. Every time you load them, it would change.
So what you're talking about, basically imagine you've got a retail store that is one retail store, but actually something in that retail store has changed. So instead of it having one row, it now has two rows. Okay, so that's a slowly changing dimension.
Yeah.
A partition is different rows that are completely different. They're not even in the same thing, just living within different sections of a table, basically. So it's not ever the same data.
So to jump in, I think what is going confused is the name slow changing dimensions. He thinks dimensions a table.
Yeah,
thinks the whole table's changing. It's not. It's the rows.
But I think I may be using the wrong thing. You know, like in a merge statement, if you've got millions of rows, you don't want everything to be updated every time the refresh happens.
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking of. This sounds similar to that. So
it is similar to that because it is exactly that. I'm going to come on to that.
That's what I was.
Got that. Cool. Any other questions before I move on? No. Wicked. So why do we partition in Power BI? Well, first things first is it saves you hosting all of your data, all of those 35 million rows in your PBX file. You only need to store as much data as you want to write some queries, some DAX sort of investigations. You want to store enough data in order to run some data checks, make sure you got your data types right, etc., etc. That's all you need to do. The next reason you are going to do this is it's going to potentially improve query or report performance. I'll come on to the potentially at the very end of this session because it's quite confusing. But the reason you're going to most likely improve your query or report performance, a lot of words, over a partition table is when you partition your table, Power BI will store some metadata for each partition. And when I say metadata, I mean like a minimum and maximum date for the range of dates that are in that partition. So if you submit a DAX query for 2021 and you've got a partition table that has 2022, 2023, 2024, the DAX query is only going to hit that partition that has the 2021 data in it because it will read the metadata and it will say, don't need these, I'm going to just focus on this one. Therefore, your DAX query will return information to your report much quicker because it's not scanning your whole table. I'll, as I said, come on to why it might not do the thing you want it to at the very end of this session. The next thing it's going to do, a partition table, is it's going to speed up your refresh. The three things that I've written down are basically all the same thing, but reduced resources because you're only focusing on refreshing a very small part of that table and not all of it. If you're doing a smaller refresh, that's going to free up a load of memory for people to use on DAX and other things. And all of that together means that you're going to have much less load on your capacity. If you've got much less load on your capacity, that means that our IT overlords are much happier because your Power BI environment isn't creaking. And this is the CTIO sat in the server room because that's exactly where they all sit. And he's obviously chuffed because he's got a nice, healthy Power BI environment. And because we're not going to finance every 30 seconds and asking them for a brand new premium capacity, we're going to keep the costs to the organization low. And that's our CFO sat in the safe, obviously. So, I mean, we've already answered this question multiple times tonight, but this is my chance to make sure that you guys have been paying attention. How do you partition in Power BI? Anyone want to answer? Kranthi covered it loads. Okay, go on. Someone want to say it begins with I, and there's another word that begins with R. There we go. Incremental refresh. 10 points to whoever said it. Hands up. Who has used incremental refresh? We've got a couple, which is good because lots of people are going to learn lots of things other than what they already learned from Kranti's presentation. So when you set up incremental refresh, what happens is you create one very small partition in your data model between the date range that Kranthi showed you earlier, and I'm going to demo this in a little bit. Then you publish your model up to the Power BI service, and on that first refresh that is triggered, Power BI will automatically generate the rest of the partitions in the service. So the rest of the data is then stored up on the Power BI service. Then data is archived or stored. Kranthi went into this. I call it stored because, as Kranthi said, it's not just there, like it's not just forgotten about. It's there, ready to be used whenever. Archived to me means that it's put on the shelf, forgotten about, and can't be used at all whatsoever. Stored to me makes a little bit more sense. And then obviously data is refreshed depending on what policy you set. And as I've sort of alluded to already with the monthly or the daily data being rolled up into a monthly partition, your partitions are automatically managed by the service as the dates move on. So what does that look like? We're going back to our example of being in May again, because I like to set things up and then never change them. So we're back to that table. We have set our partitions up at a month level, and then most recently we want the data set at a day level. So if we were going to say only refresh our last 3 days worth of data, all of that up at the top is not being refreshed at all whatsoever. And this down at the bottom is being refreshed. And obviously, as we then move into the next day, that bracket moves and it moves and it moves and it moves. And then at the end of May, all of these daily partitions will be automatically rolled up into a monthly partition. And then June will be done at the day level. Does that all make sense to everyone? That's exactly how incremental refresh works. So how do we use it? Again, this is going to be easy for me because it's mostly been covered. But we need some range and start and range end parameters. We need a date time column. And one thing that wasn't covered earlier is we need to make sure that query folding is in place. So let's go and have a little look at what that looks like from Power Query's perspective. I normally zoom in here and show you my range start and range end parameters up at the top, but I don't necessarily need to. I will just show you one thing. So Kranthi put in a date range of 5 years. I tend to use about 1 or 2 days worth because that's usually all I need to store in my PBX file in order to create my DAX, make sure it's working. And like I said, do a couple of hygiene factors on my table. So you don't need to store all of the data that is in that table. You can just have the narrowest date range you ever need. The other important thing to say at this stage is you'll notice it doesn't have a space in the wording. If you put a space in, it will not work. Power BI it will have to recognize that they're called range start and range end in that factor. The other thing is make sure it's a date time. Otherwise, again, it will not work. Then once you've set up your range start and range end parameters, you can do the filtering that was shown earlier. What I wanted to just quickly show you before I show you the filtering is this table doesn't actually have a date time column in it. If I scroll all the way through and you take a look at the dates, you'll see they're all just dates. In fact, there's only 3. So what you can do is you could duplicate a date column, and then you can turn it into a date time column, as I've done here. So basically, I've duplicated my return date column, and then I've just changed it to a date time as I've renamed it. And that will work purely because changing a date column to a date time does not break query folding. And I'll go into what that is in a second. There's one important thing for me to note here as well. So when you set your filters, just be very careful to always only put your equals before or after an equals at one end. If you put it on both ends, you'll end up with 1 day's worth of data duplicated across 2 different partitions. So make sure your equals is only on one side. But that you can see is using the filtering that I've set up. And now that table that had loads of rows in it now has only got 5, 6 rows because I filtered it down. I did mention query folding a lot. What query folding is Power BI's ability to wrap up all the transformations that you have done in your table in Power Query and send it back to the database as a SQL query. I don't know why they called it query folding. It's a bit of a stupid name, especially with my accent. You can't really say it properly. It ends up like sounding like I'm saying query, like Jonathan Ross. But query folding, yeah, is just basically Power BI's ability to send a query back to a database. The benefit of doing that is the data is returned to Power BI exactly as it needs to be. Power BI doesn't have to do any processing afterwards. And that's the key to making sure that incremental refresh works.
Is that what you usually call push down queries?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Query folding, you can check is definitely in place by right-clicking on your final step. And if you can see it, like you can see it here, it's in place, you're okay, all's good. If it looks like move after and it's grayed out, you've broken query folding, it's somewhere in your steps, and you're going to have to go back and find out the step that's broken it. Easy enough to do because you'll click on all of your steps. The one that's grayed out is the one that's broken query folding. And I'll tell you where most people tend to do it with SQL databases, and it's changing a data type from a decimal to an integer. Everyone thinks that's an easy transformation, but databases, SQL Server has, I don't know, it's about 200 different types of integers. And it just doesn't know which one to choose. So it's one of the transformations that everyone expects to work, but will not work. You can merge tables, you can append tables, as long as they sit within the same database, that's going to keep query folding in place. So there's lots of advanced stuff you can actually do in order for it all to be packaged up and sent back. One final thing to say on query folding, if anybody wants to have a look at the native query that's sent back to SQL, you could do it. I wouldn't advise it because Power BI is not very good at writing SQL. A human would be able to write it much better than this, which always gives me confidence that these AI functionalities that are coming out are not going to overrule us just yet. Okay, before I move back up to the service, does anybody have any questions on incremental refresh or query folding or anything that I've just covered? Cool. All right. So once that's...
So where you build the queries then if it's not good in the Power BI?
Say again?
Where you build your queries if it's not good in the Power BI?
Oh, as in SQL queries or...
Okay.
So, I mean, you can't tell Power BI what SQL it's going to write. It will write its own SQL. Is that what you were talking about? Where do I build my own queries?
Yes.
I tend to, if I'm writing a SQL query, I'll tend to populate a view or a table with that and then import it to Power BI rather than asking Power BI to send that back. That's what we'd call like a custom or a native query in Power BI language. Native queries can be folded. Sometimes you'll do something like use a subquery or a CTE or a with or transformation like that. Power BI won't be able to fold those. So it's always best to plug those in at the database level and then just import that table as is to Power BI. That's sort of the gold standard there. Make sense?
Yeah. You mean DAX is still developing?
So DAX is obviously different to stuff that's done through Power Query. DAX will only be sent back. Well, DAX is actually never sent back to your source system. It will always be wrapped up into a SQL query and sent back. So yes, DAX doesn't necessarily, whatever happens with Power BI, it just doesn't write the best SQL, put it that way. But yeah, if you're writing SQL and then moving stuff into Power BI, keep your SQL in your database, populate a table or a view, and then bring that table or a view into Power BI as whole because it's just gold standard. It's pushing the transformation as far back as possible. Make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want some more information on that, there's a thing out there called Roche's Maxim. This guy called Matthew Roach, he's a Microsoft MVP. He came up with it, and basically it is always just push your transformations as far upstream as possible. So if you've got a database, shove them there. Yeah, cool. All right. So once I have set all of that up in Power Query, as Kranthi showed you earlier, if I click on my returns table, I can now set my policy. I've set this one to archive data starting 5 years. And then I'm going to just refresh those 3 days worth that I showed you in my slides. The important thing to note here is, like I said, showed you earlier, I had 1 day's worth of data in this. I've got 1 day's worth of data in this, and I'm asking it to do 5 years from the refresh date. I've published it up to the server. And now, after my first refresh, you can see that it's got data going all the way back to 2020 in both of my tables. So that refresh has brought all of my data in. All of my data now lives in the Power BI service, and I've got to be careful what I do with my Power BI desktop file from now on, which I'll come to in a second. So yeah, that's incremental refresh in a nutshell. There is just one more thing I wanted to show you to do with incremental refresh. So this is basically the same file, but I returns data table. Bear with me, I can never ever find it when I'm looking at it up here. So this has exactly the same policy that I have set, but on my orders table, I have set a slightly different policy. So you'll now see that I'm archiving data 4 months before the refresh date and refreshing incrementally after 3 days. So what that then does is it will actually filter and drop off any data that I don't need in my model from now on. So this model has obviously now been refreshed, and you can see that my orders table over on the left-hand side only has data from January to April. I haven't refreshed this model since April last year, which is why it's only showing 4 months worth of data from last year. But all of that other 5-year history has been dropped out of the model. It doesn't need it because I've not asked it to be set within my parameters. So in Power BI, when you set incremental refresh, can actually just get rid of any data that you don't want, which I would call archived. So that's it for incremental refresh. I hope everybody kind of now understands how it can be used, why it's used. I wouldn't advise using it until you've got millions and millions and millions of rows of data. It's not really necessary, but it can be used. So yeah, hopefully now everyone's up to speed on incremental refresh. The next part of this presentation, we're just going to sort of go through first 2 questions because it introduces, for me, the XMLA endpoint. Then I'm going to cover the XMLA endpoint, and then I'm going to come back to these questions because you'll have forgotten about them. So what happens if the first refresh that you do in Power BI service exceeds the maximum time allowed for a Power BI refresh? And the next question that I will answer is, what happens if you need to update your model without overwriting the data that sits in the service? In both of those scenarios, I mean, this is not strictly true now because there are other tools that you can use to do this, but you most likely going to engage, or you have been for a long time, going to engage the XMLA endpoint. So the XMLA endpoint, for those who don't know, is, I mean, it's essentially just a connection interface. It's the thing that moves things from one place to another. It's been available in Power BI since 2019. I put in preview, and then it went into GA in 2021, which is a lot quicker than anything else goes into general availability nowadays. For example, field parameters, 3 years, guys, 3 years. So what it does is it allows tools to access, manage, and interact with any semantic model that is sat on the Power BI service. And it does this by exposing the analysis services engine that sits behind all semantic models. Not a lot of people know that Power BI is just sat on top of analysis services. What it will do is it allows you to do both read and write operations. And by read, I mean that you can write queries in any of these tools down at the bottom and a few more, send that to Power BI, and Power BI will return data into that tool set. And yes, I have not made a mistake. You can return Power BI data into Tableau and visualize it in Power BI in Tableau using the XMLA endpoint. You can't do that the other way around, though, can you? And the sort of pinky box over here, the write operations, that just means you're opening up a whole Pandora's box of opportunities for advanced modeling, which I'm going to talk to you about for a second. So the XMLA endpoint will allow you to do things like comprehensive data set management, using tools like DAX Studio, Tabular Editor, SQL Server Management Studio. We're going to see quite a little bit of that when I start to talk about the advanced partitioning scenarios. We won't be seeing DAX Studio, though, unfortunately. That's the one thing that's left out of today. You can do application lifecycle management through ALM Toolkit. You'll definitely be seeing a little bit of that in a minute. Complex semantic modeling through Tabular Editor. So what I mean by complex semantic modeling is there are many functionalities that are supported by Microsoft and available within Tabular Editor, but haven't quite yet been moved through to the desktop end yet, because Power BI sits on analysis services engine. Tabular Editor hooks straight into that analysis services engine and could do a load of things that desktop can't. And it's all supported by Microsoft. The most recent thing that people might know about are calculation groups. They've been moved into the desktop version, but they've actually been available in Tabular Editor since 2019, since it became a thing. So yeah, there's a lot of complex stuff that you can do that's completely supported by Microsoft, but you have to use Tabular Editor to do it. And then if this is your bag, you can also, through the XMLA endpoint, hook up DAX Studio or SQL Profiler. You can do some debugging or monitoring of your DAX queries, which most people tend to do, hopefully, when they're writing new DAX and looking to check out why it's not running as optimally as possible. But what you can actually do through SQL Profiler is you can do DAX queries, but you can also debug your refresh as well, which is where things really start to get exciting. Couple of last things on the XMLA endpoint. You have to have a premium capacity or premium per user, which does make it a lot more affordable for most people. And every single tool set that I have used here, that's all got free versions that everybody can download. There are higher paid versions of Tabular Editor, but they all have free versions that people can interact with and use as long as they have the premium per user license. In order to get your companies to set this up, if you have a premium capacity or a premium per user license, two different ways of doing it, unfortunately, but it's Microsoft, so why wouldn't there be two different ways of doing it? The important thing to highlight on this slide is that you need to set read write, otherwise you won't be able to do all of the things that I'm going to show you today. Read only will only allow you to submit queries and view data and visualize it through the XML endpoint. Write is where you get the full end of it. How you connect to the XML endpoint. On any workspace that is a premium per user or a premium capacity workspace, you'll be able to go to the settings, go to license info, and down at the bottom, you'll see this connection link. That link down here, for those online, is exactly what you need to copy and put into any of the tools that you're going to use the XML endpoint through. I'll show you a little bit of that in a second. So I said I'd come back to these questions because everybody forgets exactly what they are, including myself. So what happens if your first refresh is going to exceed that maximum time? And then what happens if you need to update the model without overwriting it? So firstly, if you're going to exceed that maximum time, Power BI's maximum time for any refresh is 5 hours. Even if you use incremental refresh, that first refresh, if you've got large enough tables, is going to likely take over 5 hours. The longest refresh I've had was 13 hours, and I only know that because I use the XML endpoint. Because, and I've given my next point away, the XML endpoint, you don't have a refresh limit. It can run for as long as you bloody well want it to.
I think it's 48 refresh.
Say again?
48
No,
refresh.
so 48 is the amount of times that you can refresh in a day.
Yeah.
This is the amount of hours that a refresh can run for. So there's a couple of different limits. But yeah, as I said, you can get around that with the XMLA endpoint. That refresh time limit of 5 hours, there's absolutely no way of working it out. So if you reckon you've got a really large data model and you think you're chancing it, probably just go straight to the XMLA endpoint and don't try and do it with that 5 hours, because you'll hit go, you'll walk away from your laptop, and then 5 hours later, you'll come back and you'll have an email saying, oh, your refresh has been throttled. Great. That was 5 hours wasted. So yeah, if you've got, you know, billions of rows in fact tables, probably just go straight to the XML endpoint because you're going to save yourself 5 hours. When you do this, you've got a couple of options, and I'm going to show you all of them. So the first one is you could bootstrap your partitions in Tabular Editor. The next one, well, you basically have to then do the next step, which is to process your tables and partitions through SQL Server Management Studio. Or you could just process a whole model refresh through SQL Server Management Studio. I didn't cover this earlier, but the Blue Peter logo, right, is A, that's a sign for me that I have to do a demonstration because otherwise I'll forget. And B, it's there because there used to be well, it is the Blue Peter logo. There used to be this program, kids program on BBC, and they used to have lots of craft demonstrations. And every craft demonstration said, here's one I made earlier. And all my demos are basically stuff that I made earlier and I'm just showing it to you. So that's why it's the Blue Peter logo specifically. So in Tabular Editor now, what we're going to do first of all is we're going to bootstrap some partitions. Who's actually used Tabular Editor before? Have we got some users in the room? Good, excellent. So basically what I've done is I've connected to, and this is that workspace logo that I, connection ID that I showed you earlier. I've connected up to my data model that sits in the Power BI service. And here are all the tables that you see within that model. Imagine we're in Power Query and everything's over on that left-hand side. This is exactly what you see here. My returns table, it doesn't have any partitions in it yet because I've not triggered a refresh in the service. So I've just published it up and nothing else has happened. So that returns really awkwardly named thing there is actually just what was set in the Power BI service, in the Power BI desktop. So there's the M code in the advanced editor that sits within that model. Because this table has a refresh policy set on it though, in Tabular Editor, I can right click and hit apply refresh policy. And what that's going to do is it's going to read the refresh policy that I set over on that front end. And then it's going to populate all of the partitions that are going to make it match. So you can see the yearly partitions from 2020 backwards. And then as we get closer to the current day, we end up with a quarter partition for Q1. And then Q2 is actually partitioned at the day level. Sorry, it's not Q2, it's February, but it's at the day level. So that first partition is Q1 January. And then we've got Q1 February 01, which is the 1st of February, 02, which is the 2nd of February. So it's partitioned in that table now at the day level. What that hasn't done though, is it has not put any data in those partitions. So that's why I say bootstrap, because all I've done is just generated them. I haven't actually got any data in them. And that's where my second bullet point of selectively processing things comes in. So in my data model, and by the way, again, I'm connected through the XMLA endpoint. You can see my connection string up at the top, that really sort of awkward thing, but that is the connection string to this workspace. Again, I can drop down, these are my 3 models that are in that workspace. Drop down the tables, and there's the tables that sit within my model. If I right click on the returns, I can look at the partitions that are now sat within it, and hopefully we'll see all of those partitions that I just generated. Yes, but you can see they've got no rows and they've never been processed. So now that I've bootstrapped them, I'm going to come into SQL Server Management Studio and I'm going to process them. And by the way, one thing I said I was going to cover, and I've kind of sort of alluded to it already. If you've got data in an incremental refresh table and you want to refresh a historic partition because say you've got some data from 2020 and somebody's gone and done something in your source system and it needs to be moved through, this is how you would selectively refresh just that partition to update the data so it matches. So although it's being archived and stored, Power BI automatically won't refresh it, but you can go and refresh it generally like yourself, basically. So this is exactly how. So I could just decide to refresh any single one of these partitions myself, or I can grab all of them and I can refresh them all in one go. Over here, we've got the process button. I'm going to hit that. That's going to bring up a new box. Again, I could select them here, so I can deselect. I can select just 2021. In fact, my box isn't working, or I can select them all. I'm going to choose a full refresh. There are a couple of different types of refresh that you can do here. Full refresh is what happens when the Power BI service does a refresh. It is the only refresh that you can do from this side of things that will refresh all of your tables, well, all of the things that you select in this box, in fact. All of the hierarchies that sit within that table, all of the relationships that that table is connected through, any calculated columns, and anything. So full refresh is the only thing that will do all of those. The rest of them will not. So generally, it's the best idea to just go and select full refresh. There are a few reasons why you'd select a couple of the others, but I'm not going to cover them here. If I hit go and OK, what you'll see is that refresh will start, and I've just populated a refresh for all of these partitions. I could also script this out. I'm going to come into this scripting later, but this is a bit of an advanced preview. And then once this is populated in a new window, I can go and grab a few other tables. So I could grab for The country table, I could grab a script for that as well, script that out, and I can add this into that script, and then I'm going to refresh all of those partitions and the country table. So this would be how I would start to refresh multiple tables and multiple partitions at the same time. So I could add this in at the bottom down here. This is well advanced look for what I'm going to do. You'll notice that this one just specifies the table, whereas this one specifies a partition. So that's how you would selectively process your partitions and a few of the tables at the same time. The last thing you could do if you wanted to trigger a refresh through the XMLA endpoint that is going to supersede that 5-hour limit is you can right click on your database. You can go down to process database. You can process full, and then you can hit go. And that's going to do exactly what the Power BI service does, but it will supersede that 5-hour limit. So you won't have a problem with the 5-hour limit. Any questions on that before I move on? Cool. All right, we're rocking through this today. So what happens if you need to update your data model when you've done incremental refresh without overwriting the data? So basically what I mean by that is with incremental refresh enabled in the PBIX file, all of your data lives up on the service. None of it actually lives down in that PBIX file at all whatsoever. Because remember, I showed you that I've only got 1 day's worth of data. So if I was to add a column to a table or change the name of a column or change the DAX, and then if I hit publish from the PBIX file, it's going to overwrite all of your partition data up on the server. It doesn't do a metadata update. So the solution here is ALM Toolkit, and there are a few other different ways of doing this now. But ALM Toolkit is the one I've been using for the last couple of years, and there are a few reasons I'll go into when I show you it, why I would always use it. One of those reasons is it allows you to selectively push the changes that you've made to your model up to the service. So you can actually say, don't want this one, but I do want this one. And then obviously you also get to choose how you process your data with that change. So without further ado, I've got another Blue Peter logo, which means I have to go over to ALM Toolkit this time, which is, it should be there. It's not there, in which case we'll open it up.
Left.
Bottom left.
Oh.
Yeah, there it is. Thank you. Thank you, observant people. So has anybody used ALM Toolkit? Oh, wicked. Nobody. So this is all new. So what I've done in this file, and I'm going to make it easier for everybody to see. I have changed a few measure names. Basically, that's all I have done. So you can see over here on this left-hand side, this is the PBIX file because you can see up here desktop, local host, etc., etc. And over here on the right-hand side, you can see dataset, and you can see that connection string link to the model up in the server. So when I look at any of these at an individual level, you will see that these ones are being created because they don't exist. They do exist, they've just had a name change. And you'll be able to see that here. So basically, this this measure over here used to have number of orders in the divide. Now it has number of orders purely because I've renamed my number of orders. And that's why it's going to delete all of these as well. Just decided to do a change up here. And over on this right-hand side, you can see that I can basically selectively update, or I could actually say, no, don't do this one, skip this one. So this is what I mean by selectively processing. And there's a reason you might want to selectively process things, purely because you might not have always finished off a change to your table. You know it's not ready to go up to the server yet. You've got something in your desktop file that you just need to keep there for a while. So you might want to always just skip those and stop those going through to the service. The other reason is because you'll see here, and if I actually use my return tables, which is completely different, the other reason is your fact table. I've got a star schema so I can use that. But your partition table, your incremental refresh table, if we scroll all the way down to where things are red and green, this file in my desktop file obviously has that randomly named generated thing that sits in desktop and that doesn't sit anywhere else. And because I've refreshed my data up on the server, that has all of the partitions and all of the data is stored within those partitions. So they are fundamentally different. There is a difference between the two files. What I don't want to do is I don't want to update my fact tables because I will overwrite the data. All I want to do is update the measures that I've changed or create the new ones, etc., etc. So I'm just going to skip those fact tables when I do that update. Now, this is great and all, as long as you haven't done something to your fact tables. So when I say done something to your fact tables, I mean added a column, for example. You might have a brand new measure that you want to start pulling through. So in those cases, you can't skip the fact tables, but what you can do is you can play around with the options. And you always really, when you use LM Toolkit, you always have to go to this option bar anyway, purely because this very final option, and that's visible down here. So you see there, it says process only affected tables. That tick box needs to be ticked. If you don't tick it, if you've skipped a table, it doesn't matter, it's going to process it anyway. So yeah, always before you use LM Toolkit, before you hit process and go, come in, tick that box, check your processing option, says full if that's exactly what you want to do. That's exactly what you will have to do before you go. But the way that you can basically make sure that you can process a change to a fact table without overwriting the data is the settings that are unticked in the middle there. For table updates, retain partitions. So if you tick that, and I can't do it because I'm zoomed in, but if you tick that, it enables the bottom one. The reason I leave the bottom one unticked is because what I show you later on with advanced partitioning, those partitions are not refresh policy based. I have created them myself. If you've got incremental refresh, tick both of them, because incremental refresh, they are refresh policy based. So if I was to now process a full change in my model now, and I wasn't skipping my fact tables, it would retain the data that are held in my partitions. It will retain the partitions. It will fully refresh the fact table to bring through that new column if that is exactly what I had done to my data model. So that's how you use LM Toolkit. If I was ready to put these things through, I would validate the selection. Validate the selection just runs a few algorithms to make sure that I haven't got any errors that it can immediately spot. That, when it's all good, gives me that update button. I hit the update button, and the XMLA endpoint moves all of that stuff through to the Power BI service. So that's how, if you've got incremental refresh, you can make changes to a PBIX file, push them up to the service without overwriting any of your data. Any questions on that before I move on? Cool.
Why, sorry.
Yeah,
What's
go for
the ALM toolkit? What's it for primarily? Just for this?
It's just for this. So it's just a connection interface that moves things from one to another.
Okay.
So you mentioned that you can put, update push your application to the service without overriding the partition. What if you have actually added a column to your table?
So that's where you would use this option down here. So if I'd added a column to my orders on my return table, I wouldn't skip it like this. I would update it. But what I would do is I make sure I have both of these tick boxes ticked. So that's for table updates, retain partitions. So it retains them when it updates the table. And the second one is retain only refresh policy-based partitions. When you have incremental refresh, your partitions are refresh policy-based.
So if you actually add a column, you need to refresh the data.
Yes.
But we still retain the
partition. Yeah, it just keeps those partitions in place. It refreshes the data because every row will have a new value in that new column, basically. So it has to refresh it. It just doesn't publish over the partitions. Any other questions? Or are we all good? Wicked. All right. So my final scenario, and this kind of introduces advanced partitioning. So what happens if you receive a different country's data every single day? This is a real life scenario. This is exactly what happened with one of my customers. And you only want to refresh that data each day. So on Monday, you get data from the UK. On Tuesday, you get data from the US. On Wednesday, France. Thursday, Brazil. Friday, Germany. The full scenario for this is we had data going all the way back to 1998. They for some reason, the client said, you know what, our customers like to query data from 1998. It's still relevant today. They had sold the data to their customers at like a ridiculous level. It's not worth me going into now, but basically each day we got the previous week's data from a different country. And we had to move it through. And because the table had over 5 billion rows in it, it was obviously not going to be something we wanted to use incremental refresh on. It wasn't going to work for this scenario. So we engaged advanced partitioning. So what I mean by advanced partitioning is basically you're going to introduce partitioning by something other than a date. In this case, it's date and country, because we only want to refresh the relevant country's partitions each and every day. We don't want to refresh every single partition for France, England, Germany, Spain, etc., when it's only England's data that's arrived. So what you're going to do when you do this is you can basically do everything in Power Query, or you can use custom SQL as long as you don't break your query folding with it. You're going to do exactly the same as you would have done basically in the desktop version. Create one partition that you can then replicate and amend once the model is published. In order to replicate and amend, you're going to use Tabular Editor. You're going to use TMSL, which is Tabular Modeling Scripting Language. It's the code I showed you a little bit earlier as a bit of a preview. TMSL is one of Microsoft's fantastic alphabet soup abbreviations, particularly as they've just brought in TMDL, which is Tabular Model Definition Language, just to confuse everybody. You could also use PowerShell. I can't write any PowerShell code though, so I'm not going to be showing you that today. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to jump in and look at what you do in Power BI desktop. So as I said, all you need to do is create one Power Query partition. The difference here to what we showed earlier is you now don't need those restart, range start and range end parameters. You notice that they've completely disappeared over from my left-hand side. What I have replaced it with is this filter here. So if I drop this down and zoom in, there we go. So you'll now see I've written my own filter, but I'm filtering to 1 year's worth of data. This is not my scenario with my customer, obviously. This is test data. 1 year's worth of data, and you can see at the end I'm filtering to country key 42. Just to show you, if I go up a step and we look at the country key, which is not currently on screen, there you go. We got 20, 221, 190, 69. So there's loads of different countries in this data model. But I have narrowed it down in this table to just one country for 1 year's worth of data. Once I've set that, I'll publish it up to the service, and then I can use Tabular Editor. So this is like the manual way to start with. So I'm going to sort of show you two different ways. First way is, like I say, manual, and you're only going to want to do this if you've got a very small number of quite large partitions, because, like I say, it's manual, it's repetitive, it takes a bit of time, and you're still not done with the job when you go here. So this is the file that I published up to the service. What I've nicely done to make it make sense is I've renamed that partition in Tabular Editor to 2020-42. If I'd have left it before, it would have been awfully named like Microsoft tend to do. What I'm going to do to make a new partition is I'm going to right click on that one and hit duplicate. Now, obviously it calls it copy. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename it to 43. Oh, that's 423. Doesn't matter. We can roll with it. I'm not going to change the date range, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the M code so that this is 423 if that country exists. I'm then going to save this up to the server, and then I'm going to have a problem because my data is not going to be in that partition. What data will be in that partition is the data that's been duplicated from the other one. So that's why I say this is only a process you want to go through if you've got a few partitions, because you're going to duplicate it, you're going to create the partition, and then you're going to have to go through to SQL Server Management Studio and refresh those partitions anyway. So this manual process is completely doable, but it's not the best way. I'm not going to probably show you the best way, but I'm going to show you a slightly different way. And the better way, sort of an automated way, shall we say. So with that partition being in SQL Server Management Studio, let me just get rid of all of these so it makes sense. This model is the same model I've just shown you. If I right click on this table, the difference here, so before when I sort of did this, you saw all the partitions that I had bootstrapped. Bootstrapping a partition in the Tabular Editor version automatically generates them up in the server. As you will see, I have created a partition in this version. It's the same model, 2024 and 23, but I haven't saved this change. So that partition hasn't moved through. When you do something manually, like I've just done, you have to tell Power BI to do it. The apply refresh policy is a generated thing, so that will automatically save up. So that explains to you why I can see that 2020, 423 here, but I can't see it here because I haven't saved it up to the database yet. Anyway, so with that, find that box now. So this box here, before I showed you the process, what you can actually do is you can actually hit script on that partition and you can see what actually defines that partition in full. And this is a TSML script command. So I'm going to talk you through it. What you see here is a create or replace command. The reason it's called create or replace is because it's multifunctional. It does two different things. It can either create a partition or it can replace one. So the reason you have the partition named twice here is because if they're named the same, so if I was to name this 43, this is exactly what I wanted to do the first time, and name this one 43, and then I run this script, obviously changing the M code down at the bottom, Power BI will look at the table that's currently partitioned and it'll go, this one doesn't exist, I need to create it. If I change this one back to 42, it's going to replace 2020 42 because it exists with 43. So it's going to overwrite that partition and replace it. So that's the reason they're called create or replace scripts, because it can do two different things with one script depending on the inputs you give it. Obviously down here we all recognize this bit. This is the M code expression that is sat in that partition and it defines exactly what it is. The rest of them basically are just TSML script things that tell you exactly what this partition is. So it's an import mode partition, has full view. It's in the query group facts because that's what I called it, and it's a M type. What you will do though with this is it's not much use as it is because you need to create and amend it. So I copy this script over, and because I'm a very basic human being, I'll break it down in Excel. This is obviously the way that you are going to be able to generate many partitions at the same time, because you can, in Excel, put this at the row level, as I'll show you that in a second, and then define exactly what each partition is going to be. So I've basically split that create or replace script up into each bit where I need to start naming something. So you'll see that first row ends where the partition is going to be named for the first time. The second row then picks up from that speech mark and then ends where I'm going to name that partition for the second time. The third row then picks up from that, and right down at the bottom it will end where I need to enter my year, etc. So on and so on and so on. So that's the create or replace partition. In my create scripts tab, I have run a SQL query over my database and got all of the country codes and all of the years that have data within them. So I know that this is the full list of the partitions I need to populate. There's 99. This is, again, like I say, a very small test data set. When I did this with the customers, I've run this and had thousands of partitions created. What I've obviously done at this end level, so these bits of the database levels here, so this is the year, the country key, and the end year, and then I've just joined them together with a bit of Excel code to concatenate them together, and then each row, and I'm sure those who've been writing SQL for years have done this with insert or merge statements. They've pulled it apart in Excel, structured it like this. This is exactly how I came up with this methodology. So each row is a fundamentally different partition. You can see as I go down, most of the country keys will say 14, but they'll actually have 2021 and 2022, and so on and so on and so on. One thing I haven't talked to you about is this cell up here. This is the very start of the TSML query. It's the sequence command, and it allows me to basically sequence all of the partitions and all of the refreshes in one fell swoop, in one script that's going to populate and refresh all of my data at the same time. So basically what you see here is sequence, start of the sequence command, and then max parallelism. It's set to 30. Parallelism basically allows me to control and make the number of queries that are sent back to my database higher than Power BI's default. Power BI's default for queries sent back to a database at the same time is 4. You can underwrite it, so you could set that to 1, and this script would refresh one partition at a time, or you can override it, set it to 30, which is the maximum, and it will send 30 queries back to the database for refreshing at the same time. I would only recommend setting it to 30 if you know your database can handle it. You don't want your head of IT or whoever ringing you up and going, "What are you doing to my database? Why are you sending 30 queries through?" So yeah, please check with them and make sure that it's actually capable of doing it before you set that to 30. Manage the power at your hands. So this is basically how I break down my create script. I've done the same with the refresh script. So I showed you a refresh script earlier. Again, the start of the refresh script goes at the top, so I just define it as a refresh. I put my type in as full, and then I define all my objects. Exactly the same process. The only difference with this page is because this section needs to close off the query. You saw over in my script parts, I had my final wrapper over in this corner. A little bit of Excel code in this one just says that when this column is empty, give me that final refresh wrapper at the end so that I know this script is going to work. So what everybody would naturally do from this point onwards is copy this and go straight back over to SQL Server Management Studio, because this is exactly where you're going to run it, and then paste it in. But it won't work. And it's not going to work because of those double quotes. So Excel likes to, because of the spacing that is put in around, because I formatted my query, Excel will put in double quotes so that it handles that. And this was a bit of a fluke, but I just thought, do you know what? I'm gonna paste it into Word and see what happens. Oh, single quotes, excellent, fantastic. So we know that this script is going to work. So I'm going to grab that's my create or replace, and then I'm going to go and grab my refresh partitions script. I'm going to plug that in at the end of it. Ooh, let's go all the way to the bottom. Do that again. There we go. So we've got a comma, which means we can head that off. Paste that in. Oh, that's wrong. I've gone straight to SQL Server Management Studio. Go to Word first, Mark. Okay. Cool. And then we can copy that whole script. Go back to SQL Server Management Studio. So I will now be able to run this script, and what you can see is I've got all of my refresh partitions at the end. If I was to go all the way to the top, it's a long script now. There you go. There's my create ones. Still got the double quotes, but that's because I pasted in the old version. There we go. So yeah, if I was to hit go on the script without the one that's at the top, ugly, this would then override the 5-hour limit. It would create all of those new partitions in my returns table, and it would then refresh them afterwards without me having to run 2 scripts, because I've sequenced them together. The one thing that's missing is obviously I haven't put all of my dimension tables in there either, but that's nice and easy, because at the very bottom of this script here, I could manually, again, just decide to copy this one here. Within this, put a comma, change this, get rid of that partition row because we don't want that. Get rid of that comma, and then I could just change this to the name of one of my dimensions. So I could manually add them in, or I could go and grab a script, or I could go back to Excel and I could change that script exactly the same with populate that table, exactly the same with all of the names in my database, and then run that. And that's like processing the full model refresh whilst generating all of the partitions and then adding the data into them. So that's how you would do advanced partitioning through the XMLA endpoint. Just one more slide to go through before you can all go home, have a beer, relax, have some pizza, whatever you've got going on. So, considerations. Said at the very beginning that I was going to talk you through something. I haven't just yet. First consideration is, if you use incremental refresh or advanced partitioning through the XMLA endpoint, in fact, if you use the XMLA endpoint with your data model, you will not be able to download it from the service once you have done that, once it's been subject to a write operation. There are quite a few reasons why you wouldn't want to, such as if you had that 5 million row table, published it up to the service, refreshed it, all of your data is sat in that model. Why do you need to download it? You've got that desktop file that has very little data in it. Use that, move things through. So you wouldn't really want to download your PBX file anyway, but you can't. Well, technically you can now with Power BI projects, but we won't get into that. There's lots of other explanations for that. I said that there is a scenario where you might actually make Power BI DAX queries worse through using incremental refresh or through partitioning. And that's because what you can do is you can set up too many small partitions, and the sample model that I showed you, it's got a 6-row partition. That's too small. You can set up too many small partitions, and what that will do is lead to too many segments that is too small as well. Now, I haven't mentioned segments until now because it gets really complex from this point onwards, but just imagine that a partition is actually split up into many smaller things as well, and that's what your segments are. You can obviously control the size of your partitions through what I've shown you today, and you can control the size of your segments as well. You wouldn't really want to, don't worry about it. I've done a lot of testing over it, and it gets quite complex and quite frustrating. But yes, if you were to have too many small partitions with too many small segments, your DAX queries could get worse because you've created so many things that your DAX query has to scan. That bit isn't actually the worst bit. Scanning all of those things is reasonably quick. It's the joining of all of those things back up together into one result at the end that is the really slow thing. So if you generate too many small partitions with too many small segments, and your DAX query covers all of those, it's going to take a long time to roll them back up into one result at the end. And that's how you'll slow down your performance of a DAX query.
Is there a threshold for that?
So again?
Is there a threshold for that? Like, is it 10, 20?
Okay, so the default Power BI service setting for a segment size is 8 million rows. So ideally what that means is you would like to partition at the size of either 8 million rows, 16 million rows, 32 million rows, so multiples of 8 basically, because you'll end up with 2 segments if you have 16 million rows per partition. If you have 8 million rows in a partition, you'll have 1 segment. So that's kind of the thought process. Obviously, in an ideal world, nobody knows that they're going to have 8 million rows per partition, but you want to have it around that mark, basically, or a bit higher, or in multiples of, so that you can have multiple partitions. And you want to try and get your partitions to be as close as possible to each other. You don't want to have lots of different size partitions, because then you'll end up with 3 segments in one, and 5 in another, and 17 in another. And that's just going to cause Power BI all manner of problems when rolling that back up. So no, unfortunately, I can't give you an answer for sort of the level, but now you know that there's 8 million rows per segment. That's sort of what you need to match to your partition size, basically. Make sense? Cool. So last couple of bullet points. You definitely need to, once you've done what I've done, test your model for optimal partition and segment sizes. Partitions, easy to generate. We can just change that SQL query, or we can change the M code. Segment sizes, there's a setting that you have to change within SQL Server Management Studio. Microsoft have done their very best to hide it away. You only can change it to default, like a certain number of values. You can't just enter any number of values in there you want. Power BI has said it's at 8 million, 16, there's 32. There's a couple of like different sizes that you can set it to. And each time you change that, you have to reload your data model. Then you have to refresh your you have to reload your data model, refresh your data into your data model, so it changes the partitions and the segments. Then you have to test it for DAX performance, and you actually also have to test it for refresh performance as well. So there's a lot of repetitive stuff that you have to do to make sure that your data is partitioned and segmented at the right level, so that your end users are not impacted. You obviously have to get familiar with TSML scripting. I've shown you the create or replace command. I've also shown you the refresh command, but there is a merge command, there's a delete command, and there's a lot of other different scripts that TSML has, but won't actually work with Power BI, purely because it's a analysis services language, and they haven't enabled all of the things that you can do with it in Power BI models yet. So yeah, I had some fun with Microsoft when I first started writing it. I was like, why isn't this command working? And I sort of talked to about 3 different people with Microsoft, and eventually one of them came back and went, yeah, because that doesn't work with Microsoft's Power BI's level of compatibility yet. It will work on an analysis services database yet. Obviously, Microsoft's documentation is not the best, so they didn't really think to mention that some of the scripts will only work with analysis services and others will work with Power BI. You'd think it would be a nice thing for them to put down, but no. And the final thing is, when you use incremental refresh, I've told you that all of your partitions are automatically managed by the Power BI service. when you do what I've just shown you and set up your partitions automatically by yourself and do them through the TSML scripting, that will not automatically be managed. So what I say there is when we had that scenario where a new customer's data arrived every week or each day of each week, we had to come up with a process to automate the refresh from the data being finished in Oracle through to it moving through to it generating the new partitions or adding the data to the partitions that already existed. We had to do that all ourselves. It's very complex. It required an ADF pipeline. It required a lot of knowledge of SQL and a lot of knowledge of TSML. It required PowerShell, which we had to get someone in to help us with, a webhook, and lots of other different things because, oh, and the Power BI refresh API, because basically you need to find a process that's going to feed the script to the refresh API. PowerShell is the thing that does that. The webhook obviously triggers it and generates it. And the ADF pipeline was to move the script through from the auto generation in our database all the way through to the PowerShell script that triggered it through the API. So yes, it was quite a complex process. Not something I want to go through again, and not something I'd recommend you lot do unless you are really good at writing PowerShell. Because I tried for ages and couldn't do it and disliked it. So yeah, I got someone to do it for me. Anyway, that has been actually all from me. So thanks everyone for your attention. If there are any other questions, feel free to throw them at me now. Otherwise, thank you.
There's no way you can actually use the convenient Microsoft provided facility to that automatic partitioning together with you sort of like tingling TSML or whatever. Yeah.
Could you do both? Yes, you could, because you could add your own partition to a table that you have set up as an incremental refresh table. When you publish that, it flags it as a policy-based model. If you were to add your own partition to it, yes, it would still work because it's still refresh policy-based, but you'd have to make sure that it was put in at the right level. It wasn't duplicating your data.
Then will whatever you set up in the Microsoft tool then override what you've done?
Not a question I can answer at that level. I'd imagine if you were to put it in within the same sort of policy, it would manage it. If it was out of line with that policy, it might overwrite it, it might delete it. To be honest, like I wouldn't know, but I guess I'd say that it would be some problems. I have not tried it, no. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very specialized field. My question is, for example, in Leeds, if there are 500 Power BI service subscribers, how many people are using partition?
It's a very good question. The XMLA endpoint level, like I've just shown you, zero. It's so niche. Like I say, I've been working in data for 9 years, and I've only ever, I mean, I think I'm really lucky to have come across 2 customers that needed this. But incremental refresh.
Asda.
Again?
Asda.
Asda?
Yeah, we've had a previous.
Are you talking about Asda?
No, we've had a previous speaker said for Asda, but there's not many people who sold out. I mean, I'd be interested to know where you're getting 5 million records from, 5 billion records from. I mean, you're obviously like getting a lot more data than most of us. You know, we're British Yorkshire folks up here, but the only I mean, there's a few places, but say that I don't. But we had the Asda BI guy come in and give us a similar talk earlier. But yours is the best that I've sort of seen here. Really good.
To answer your question about sort of, so if you had 500 users in the sort of Leeds area using Power BI, I would say 20% of them have probably got to use incremental refresh because they've got to sort of level where it becomes necessary.
No partitioning, I mean.
So again, like maybe 1 or 2 lucky people, basically. Not lucky. I mean, I wouldn't say you're lucky if you could do lots of things in it like Excel, like I do, break it down to a basic level. But, yeah, it's a rare thing. It's because not often do people need to partition things in Power BI with dates and country codes or other sort of types of things. product codes.
How many, I mean, people are offering outsourcing partitioning services in Leeds roughly?
Oh, I wouldn't know. I'm from Bristol. And I'd say I'm probably the only person in Bristol that does it.
Okay, then come on, Bristol.
Me.
Only one.
Now, there's a few other sort of Power BI experts around Bristol area, and maybe one or two of them know how to do it as well. Whether they've got clients that needed it, I don't know. But it's like I say, it's niche.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
StreamYard.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just finish off, guys. If you want to catch Mark, he'll be around for another 30 minutes or so. You can grab him. But just wanted to remind you guys of next month, 13th of March, we've got Ruth Basuelo Martinez and Johnny Winter coming down, same place, same time, 13th of March here. So hopefully put that in your diaries and hopefully see you then. We've got pizzas in the back, meat eaters to the left, veg and vegan to the right. We've got one gluten-free at the back as well. So if you're not gluten-free, leave that for the gluten-free person. But yeah, enjoy pizza, enjoy some networking, some drinks in the back, and hopefully we'll see you guys next month. Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.